Right, my Royal Enfield. I've just completed the running in. I've done 305 miles almost. So now it's time to do the first oil change. I've already taken out the main drain plug and the smaller front drain plug and drained the oil whilst the engine was still touch warm. The oil that's drained out is quite dark. I shall look carefully in that to see if there's any unwanted debris. So looking under the bike, this is the front drain plug and the main sump drain plug. I've still to remove the filter gauze, and I have to remove the oil filter. Just looking at the sump plug, it's a magnetic plug. There's a little bit of loose fuzz on it, nothing concerning at all there. I'm releasing the gauze plate. It's held on by two 8mm bolts. They're only just snugged up. And the gauze filter. There's the gauze sump plate. There is some fine dusty material on the magnetic plug, but there are no sharp particles or shards. And the gauze filter itself, there is some debris on the filter, a sort of almost like silicone gasket material. So that's flange gasket material from the engine assembly, I guess. Superficially it looks like aluminium, but it's not. It's all rubbery. I should give the gauze filter a clean out with carburetor cleaner. That's now clean, ready to go back in. I also have a brand new copper crush washer, so that will be going back in with a brand new crush washer. Okay, now for the main oil filter housing. This is also retained by 8mm bolts, and I know there's a spring here. Crack these off. Again, they're not very tight. I shall hold the plate to retain the pressure of the spring. I've put wadding to catch any oil that spills so it doesn't drip onto the exhaust. Yes, the spring is quite strong. Pressure's nearly released from the spring. That's it. The tension's virtually off the bolts. O-rings, the pressure plate, an O-ring on the pressure plate, an O-ring on the seal, the filter, and tucked away in here, tucked away in the depths of there, is another O-ring that needs to come out. Okay, so I think you can see at the back of the housing there's another O-ring which I need to fish out. And there we go. This is the oil I've got. Motul 15W50 oil. And this is the genuine Royal Enfield oil filter. Contains an oil filter and 2 O-rings. So I'm going to pre-soak the oil filter in oil in this jug. Before I start reassembling, I'm just going to try something that Stuart Fillingham showed on a video where he turned the engine over on the kickstart and got several 100 millilitres more oil out of the engine. I'm going to take the spark plug out, it's too difficult to turn over by hand. Okay, so the spark plug is out. Well, there's perhaps 25-30 millilitres of extra oil has come out, so that's enough of that. Here we are at the underside of the engine again. The parts to go back in. Front engine plug is a 12mm. These were not particularly tight, so I just snugged it up and just a tenth of a turn or so, just to where it feels as though it's properly seated. And the gauze filter tube. Slightly awkward because it's so upside down doing this. The sealing plate with an O-ring goes over it. These bolts are 8mm, and again they really weren't tight. The easiest way to get these bolts back in on the plate seems to be to hold them in place with a socket and turn the socket by hand. So those are now finger tight, and I'm just going to snug them up. An 8mm wrench. No point trying to tighten these massively tight because it's a small thread into aluminium, and they were only just beyond snugged up when I undid them. I've tightened them to where they're seated, and then perhaps a tenth of a turn beyond that to where the bolt feels properly bottomed out. No more than that. Okay. There was a bit more oil came out through turning the engine over on the kickstart. That's a helpful tip from Mr. Fillingham. The size of this is 19 millimeters. 19 millimeters is quite a big wrench, so I don't want to be doing much heaving on that into aluminium. Again, I've turned it till it's seated. The crush washer's just bedded in a tenth of a turn or so until it feels firm, but no more than that. So that's the main plugs back in place. Now for the oil filter, which has been pre-soaking. I've just put a thin smear of tacky grease on the pressure plate just to hold the O-ring in place. So here we are back at the engine. Let's push the other O-ring in. I've got a piece of soft aluminium rod just to help push the O-ring right to the back, and that's it. You need something to push the O-ring to get it into its place. Fingers aren't quite long enough. The filter, which is now pre-soaked, and the main seal. There's quite a lot of pressure to seat that cover, and these have to go in and take the pressure together. I've heard horror stories of the front lug snapping off if these are done incorrectly. So the idea is to take the pressure equally on all the bolts as they're nipped up. There is quite a lot of pressure on that, but the spring's quite strong. Right, those are just seated. Again, they're only 8mm, threading into aluminium, so no heroics. I've just seated them down, and a tenth of a turn or so, just to where it feels firm, no more. That's that. Okay. Now, time for the oil itself. I'm going to measure how much oil came out of the old oil and put in the same quantity. I'm expecting it to be about 2 to 2.2 litres. What came out was exactly 2.2 litres, so that's what's going back in. Got one of these long neck funnels. Seems to make life easier. That's 1 litre. This is the second litre going in. Now that's 2 litres that have gone in, and I notice that the oil is fully in the window, so I'm not going to add any more yet. There's 2 litres have gone in. I'm going to see how that goes when I check the oil level properly in the approved manner, starting it and letting it settle. I'm just going to put the spark plug back. The spark plug hole is quite recessed, and it's very important not to use any tools, but to line the spark plug up correctly. Make sure you've got it straight and there's no cross threading. It's easy enough to go in, but it's quite deeply recessed, so just be careful now. That's it seated finger tight. And the spark plug socket, if you use a socket, is a pretty standard 14mm spark plug socket. I'm just nipping that up firm. So not heaving on it, just nipping it up so it's seated correctly. Okay, that's that. Now I'm going to check over all the external bolts on the bike, and the chain I need to measure. It may need adjusting. It felt as though it might be a little slack after 300 miles. So the bike is lowered down. Here goes